General Hospital will reveal after his dramatic and unexpected return at the 2025 Nurses' Ball. Michael sent shockwaves through Port Charles as he stormed the stage and scooped up Wiley in front of a stunned audience. His sudden reappearance left Willow and Drew frozen in disbelief, completely blindsided by his calculated move. What seemed like an emotionally charged reunion between a father and son was, in reality, the first maneuver in a much larger strategy that Michael had meticulously crafted in secret. His abrupt return wasn't just about reclaiming time lost with his children, it was a legal power play aimed at dismantling Willow and Drew's growing case for full custody of Wiley and Amelia. But beneath the carefully constructed image of a reformed, devoted father, Michael harbored a secret so explosive that its exposure would destroy the very foundation he was attempting to build. In the days following his return, Michael orchestrated a series of familial moments to portray stability. He brought Wiley and Amelia to Carly's house, where the children laughed and played, surrounded by familiar faces and the warmth of their paternal legacy. To the outside world, Michael appeared grounded, responsible, and deeply invested in his children's lives. But behind the closed doors of the Courtroom estate, he was quietly executing a cold and ruthless plan, one that required precision, deception, and the absolute elimination of any liabilities that could threaten his legal standing. Chief among those liabilities was the child Sasha was carrying. Michael knew all too well that admitting paternity over Sasha's baby would jeopardize his claim over Wiley and Amelia. Legally, a third child, born of a different relationship and outside the boundaries of his marriage to Willow, could be used to paint him as unstable, impulsive, and unfit to provide a stable environment for any of his children. With Willow and Drew's team gathering ammunition, Michael couldn't afford any cracks in the image he was trying to restore. So when he finally arranged a private meeting with Sasha, it wasn't to make peace or offer support, it was to deliver a decisive and devastating rejection. Without hesitation or remorse, Michael told Sasha that he would not be accepting responsibility for her unborn child. Instead, he doubled down on the lie they had all agreed to months earlier, that Jason was the father, and urged her to maintain the facade for the sake of everyone involved. For Sasha, the encounter was shattering. She had been carrying not only a child, but the burden of Michael's secret, preserving it even at the cost of her own peace. Her silence had been an act of protection. Not just for Michael's reputation, but for her own heart, a heart that had once, however briefly, trusted him. But in the cold, calculated way he dismissed both her and the life they had created together, Sasha finally saw her reality with piercing clarity. She was nothing more than a liability to him, a mistake he was determined to erase. The pain of that realization cut deeper than any rejection she had ever known. And in that pain, something else awakened, resolve. Haunted by sleepless nights and the growing weight of her conscience, Sasha made the decision to come forward. In a powerful public statement that rocked the Corinthos and Courtroom families, she revealed that Michael, not Jason, was the biological father of her unborn child. She detailed the carefully orchestrated deception, the late-night meetings, the lies told to friends and family, and most damningly, the moment Michael begged her to remain silent for his benefit. Her confession didn't come from a place of vengeance, but necessity. The child she was carrying deserved more than to be treated like a stain on someone's record. He or she deserved to be acknowledged, to be loved, not discarded like a secret shame. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Willow and Drew seized upon the revelation like wolves sensing weakness. They petitioned the court to reopen the custody hearings, submitting new evidence that portrayed Michael not only as dishonest, but morally compromised. They painted a vivid narrative. A man who abandoned his children, returned only to assert control, then manipulated the legal system to maintain that control while rejecting another innocent life he had helped create. They argued that if Michael was willing to lie about a pregnancy and conspire with others to conceal the truth, what else might he be hiding? Could a man so deeply embedded in deception truly be trusted with the welfare of children? The court, rattled by the sudden shift in narrative, agreed to revisit the entire case. A new psychological evaluation was ordered, and the judge began weighing the implications of Michael's actions not just on paper, but on the moral character required of a parent seeking sole custody. The image of a loving, reformed father began to crumble under the scrutiny. Testimonies from Sasha, corroborating details from Jason, and circumstantial evidence surrounding Michael's carefully timed return all contributed to a stark re-evaluation of his motives. More than the lies. What disturbed the court most was Michael's willingness to reject his own child for the sake of appearance. It suggested a disturbing prioritization of optics over emotional responsibility. Strategy over empathy. The judge questioned whether Michael truly had the children's best interests at heart, or whether he was simply trying to win, regardless of who got hurt in the process. The deception surrounding Sasha's pregnancy, once intended to protect Michael's parental claims, now stood as the clearest evidence against them. In the final ruling, the judge delivered a harsh but resolute decision. Custody of Wiley and Amelia would be granted entirely to Willow and Drew. Michael would receive limited, supervised visitation, pending further review. And regarding the child Sasha carried, the court declared that Michael had effectively forfeited his parental rights through willful denial and misconduct, unless Sasha decided otherwise. But Sasha, still reeling from the emotional fallout, made it clear she wanted nothing from Michael, not support, not involvement, not even acknowledgement. Her child, she vowed, would grow up without the shadow of his father's indifference darkening his life. Michael's empire of lies collapsed in a single week. He had returned to reclaim his children, his status, and perhaps even his identity, but he ended up losing everything. His credibility, his family, and the future he had envisioned now lay in ruins. Undone by the very secrets he once thought he could control. And as he stood alone in the grand halls of the Courtroom estate, staring at the silence that now echoed louder than any courtroom verdict, he realized that the true cost of his ambition wasn't measured in legal losses, but in the lives he had broken trying to preserve his own image. In the end, every calculated step, every strategic move, and every manipulative effort Michael had made collapse spectacularly within the very courtroom he had once believed would solidify his triumphant return. The court, no longer swayed by appearances or legal theatrics, issued a firm and uncompromising ruling. Michael was stripped of all custodial rights to Wiley and Amelia. Full legal and physical custody was granted to Willow and Drew, a decision underscored by the judge's stinging commentary on Michael's pattern of deception, moral irresponsibility, and emotional detachment. But the fallout didn't stop there. Following Sasha's heartbreaking testimony and the irrefutable evidence she provided, the court turned its attention to the unborn child, another life caught in the crossfire of Michael's ambition. The judge, citing Michael's blatant denial of paternity and his attempt to pass off responsibility to another man, ruled that Michael was not fit to share custody or involvement in the child's upbringing unless Sasha herself chose to extend that right. Sasha, standing in front of the court with quiet resolve and a heart still bruised from betrayal, made her position unmistakably clear. She would raise her child alone. She neither desired nor required Michael's support, emotionally or financially. Her words were not spoken out of spite, but from the deep understanding that protecting her child meant keeping him away from a father who had already proven he could reject and abandon. The judge, after verifying that Sasha was emotionally, financially, and legally capable of caring for the child independently, granted her sole custody. The gavel came down not just on a legal proceeding, but on the last illusion Michael had managed to maintain, that he could somehow salvage a semblance of control over the broken family he had helped create. His future as a father ended not in tragedy, but in consequence. Not one of the 3 children who bore his name would remain under his care. The loss was total, final, and public. In the days and weeks that followed the courtroom disaster, Michael's world became unrecognizable. He was no longer seen as the upstanding heir to the Courtroom and Corinthos legacies. He was no longer the man Port Charles admired or even tolerated. Friends turned their backs. Allies grew silent. Even family members began to view him with hesitation and doubt. Carly, the woman who had once fiercely defended her son through the worst scandals, found herself incapable of justifying his actions this time. The magnitude of his betrayal, toward Willow, toward Sasha, toward the very concept of fatherhood, was too great. Even she, with all her maternal instinct and unconditional love, could only watch from a distance as Michael unraveled in a quiet storm of his own making. The public turned cold. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. Business partners began to reconsider associations. His name, once spoken with pride, now echoed with discomfort and disappointment. In the vast halls of the Courtroom estate, Michael wandered alone, a man stripped of purpose, disconnected from the very roles, father, partner, son, that had once defined him. The walls that had watched him grow now bore witness to his fall. The silence of the estate was deafening, a daily reminder of the children's laughter that no longer rang through its rooms. Yet while Michael's world was collapsing inward, a quiet strength was emerging elsewhere. Sasha, though deeply wounded, rose from the ashes of betrayal with a newfound resilience. She transformed her pain into purpose, refusing to let Michael's rejection define her worth or the worth of her child. Her vulnerability became her power. She stepped into motherhood not as a victim of circumstance but as a woman choosing strength over silence. With every step she took forward, she redefined herself, not as the woman Michael denied, but as the mother who had the courage to protect her child when no one else would. Willow, too, began to soften. Once locked in bitter conflict with Sasha, she now recognized the deeper truth that bound them together. They had both been deceived, both used, both discarded in different ways by the same man. What had once been animosity gave way to empathy. Slowly, a bridge began to form between them, built not of forgiveness but of mutual respect and shared pain. They began to communicate, not as rivals, but as women determined to create something better for the children in their care. And in Drew, Sasha and Willow found a steady presence. He had once stood on the opposite side of every battle with Michael, but now, with Michael gone, Drew became an unexpected foundation. His calm, his clarity, and his unwavering commitment to both women and their children offered a kind of stability neither had known in months. He did not seek to replace what had been lost, but rather to help build something new. With Drew by their side, Sasha and Willow began to believe that their fractured lives could be mended, not back to what they were, but into something stronger. Something truer. As for Michael, his days became a blur of self-reflection and isolation. The silence that surrounded him was not just external, it seeped into his very soul. He tried to reach out, once to Carly, once to Brooke Lynn, but even their responses were tempered, guarded, as though they too were unsure of who he had become. The community he once belonged to had closed its doors, and the family he once leaned on had stepped away. His mistakes were no longer seen as forgivable missteps, but as revelations of a deeper flaw, a fundamental failure of character. He had fought so hard to win, to control, to protect a version of himself that no longer existed. And in doing so, he had lost everything that mattered. Not through accident, but through intention. Not by force, but by choice. The very hands he had used to push others away now found themselves empty, reaching out into a future where no one was waiting. This was not a tragic end, it was a deserved one. And perhaps, in time, Michael would come to understand that. But for now, the man who once believed he could manipulate fate stood alone, the architect of his own undoing, watching from afar as the lives he tried to shape without compassion moved forward without him. In the end, all of Michael's carefully laid plans unraveled in the very courtroom where he had once envisioned a triumphant reclaiming of his role as father and provider. What was supposed to be a victorious moment marking his return to stability and family unity instead became a brutal and irreversible downfall. After reviewing the mounting evidence of deception, manipulation, and emotional recklessness, the court delivered its final verdict with cold precision: Michael was stripped of all custodial rights to Wiley and Amelia. Full legal and physical custody was awarded to Willow and Drew, who were praised for their consistency, emotional maturity, and ability to provide a nurturing, stable environment. The decision left Michael legally severed from two of the children he had once fought so hard to control, and emotionally severed from the family he claimed to love. But the courtroom's reckoning did not stop there. In light of Sasha's courageous testimony and the revelation of Michael's deliberate denial of paternity, the court turned its focus to the unborn child, a child already tangled in the legacy of secrecy and betrayal. The judge, acknowledging Michael's refusal to accept responsibility and his efforts to conceal the pregnancy behind a fabricated narrative involving Jason, declared him unfit to claim any custodial rights unless Sasha voluntarily granted them. With tears in her eyes but conviction in her voice, Sasha stood and made her intentions unmistakably clear. Michael would have no place in her child's life. The man who had rejected their child, who had refused to acknowledge them for the sake of legal convenience, would not be allowed to return when it suited him. The judge, after thorough legal verification and a review of Sasha's capacity to independently raise her child, granted her full sole custody. Her rights as a mother, long silenced by guilt and emotional confusion, were now recognized and protected by the law. It was a resounding affirmation that love, truth, and courage still held value in a world too often marred by ambition and manipulation. Michael's world collapsed in slow motion. He walked out of that courtroom not as a father fighting for his children, but as a man who had lost every one of them. He was no longer considered fit to raise Wiley, Amelia, or the unborn child he had tried to erase from existence. The title of father was no longer his to claim. And as the news spread through Port Charles, the once respected Michael found himself in a swift, unrelenting free fall. Public opinion turned against him with an icy swiftness. Friends he had once counted on distanced themselves. Colleagues became cautious, uncertain whether association with him might tarnish their own reputations. Former allies in the Courtroom and Corinthos circles began to question not just his actions, but his very character. Even within his own family, Michael found no refuge. Carly, the fiercely loyal mother who had defended him through countless storms, now struggled to reconcile the son she loved with the man who had so callously discarded responsibility for his own child. The heartbreak Sasha suffered, the betrayal Willow endured, and the measured silence of Drew, all of it weighed too heavily to ignore. Carly, torn between maternal instinct and the painful truth, could no longer offer Michael the shield of protection he had always relied on. Her silence in the days that followed said more than any words of disappointment could. Alone in the once bustling halls of the Courtroom estate, Michael drifted through rooms that echoed with the absence of laughter, footsteps, and purpose. The family photos, the legacy he had inherited, now stared back at him like reminders of everything he had lost, not through tragedy, but through choice. The children he had once embraced, the love he had once inspired, the respect he had once commanded, gone. Not because someone had taken it from him, but because he had abandoned it in the pursuit of something hollow, control, image, victory. Meanwhile, across town, Sasha was undergoing a transformation. Though her heart bore fresh scars, she emerged stronger than she had ever known herself to be. She no longer viewed herself through the lens of Michael's rejection, but through the strength it took to speak the truth, to protect her child, and to claim her worth. Every day she moved forward was an act of defiance against the pain and a declaration of independence. She poured her energy into preparing for motherhood, surrounding herself with love and support from those who had seen her through the darkest hours. Willow, once her adversary, experienced her own awakening. The anger that had defined her interactions with Sasha began to fade as she saw the broader picture. They had both been manipulated, both lied to, both hurt by a man they trusted. The animosity gave way to empathy, and empathy opened the door to something even rarer, forgiveness. Slowly, cautiously, a bond began to form between them. They exchanged words, shared stories. Even laughed in quiet moments, finding healing in the very person they had once blamed. Drew, ever the quiet force of calm and reason, remained a steadfast presence for both women. He never sought recognition or credit, but his loyalty and strength became the foundation for something new, something built not on illusion, but on trust. He offered Willow stability and reassurance. He offered Sasha space to breathe and a sense of security. He became the bridge between two women navigating life after betrayal. And his presence suggested the possibility of a future that none of them could have imagined when the courtroom drama first began. As for Michael, he lived in the shadow of what he had lost. He attempted to reach out, once to Brooklyn, once to Sunny, but the responses were brief, guarded, distant. He made no public statements, attended no family gatherings, and appeared less and less in public. The once proud Corinthos Quartermain heir had become a ghost in his own life, haunted by memories of a time when he still had choices left to make. But those choices were gone now. The damage had been done, not just to others but to himself. The truth, once revealed, had set everyone free, everyone except Michael. He remained trapped in the consequences of his own making, watching from afar as the children he had lost grew up in a world filled with love, safety, and truth, without him. In the end, the courtroom defeat was more than a legal loss. It was the end of an identity, the collapse of a legacy, and the consequence of placing ambition above integrity. Michael would forever be remembered. Not for the father he could have been, but for the man who let fear and ego guide him down a path from which there was no return. And those he left behind, Sasha, Willow, Drew, and the children, would not just survive without him. They would thrive.